Hello, Jordan. How's it going?
What's going on, Rob?
Oh, not much. I did just want to, I know we got a lot of stuff to get to today. I just wanted to say a quick few words to the audience of the show who last week we broke the great news to listeners of the Insurgents that subscribers, the listeners that subscribe to the podcast over on the insurgents.substack.com would get in on the ground floor of Insurgents coin.
Yep.
And I just wanted to say maybe we want to pump the brakes on that just ever so slightly. And let's, maybe being a little bit hasty about, what we've been doing with the funds that we get from people that subscribe to the show. We don't need to get into the details of it. I would say the promises, though, of all the subscribing listeners becoming instant crypto millionaires, maybe we want to just put that on hold for a little bit.
I don't think so, Rob, because I think right now
Okay.
you got to buy the dip. You got to buy the dip on Insurgents coin. I say double down. I am moving all my assets into Insurgents coin. Where you see loss, I see opportunity. So get in on the ground floor at the insurgents.substack.com. It's time to buy the fucking dip, baby.
Listen, fortune favors the bold. Okay, you
That's
don't
right.
get rich by playing it safe. Okay.
Yep.
I'm sorry. I had a momentary lapse in my crypto bro mindset, and thank you for getting me back on track.
It's okay. It's okay. Fiat propaganda is everywhere.
Yeah.
You need to stay strong. It's okay. And the more subs we get at the insurgents.substack.com, the closer we get to an Insurgents coin Super Bowl advertisement. So you could make our dream a reality by subscribing to the show. And, like I said, you get on the ground floor of Insurgents coin, but also you get access to all of our bonus episodes, which is really more valuable than money itself.
Yeah. And also, it must be said, everyone remember this, that you can, if you've got a slurp juice, you add the slurp juice to the Insurgents coin, which instantly doubles the value of the Insurgents coin. And then you can put that in writing. That's a guarantee. Right. So
good reminder.
Yep.
It's a stable coin too. Insurgents coin is a stable coin, which means
it's right there in the
never
name.
Lose value.
It's right there in the name.
Insurgents coin.
Exactly. Thanks for tuning into the podcast, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back. We are speaking this week to Peter, a.k.a. the Law Boy, of the 5-4 podcast.
His name is Peter, and we definitely knew that before the episode.
Yes, absolutely.
As you'll know, as you'll hear throughout, we know his name is Peter.
Yes. Peter and the podcast, they do a really good job breaking down news about the Supreme Court in the U.S. Obviously, that is a major story in the news this week with the leaked decision where the Supreme Court is planning on overturning Roe v. Wade, and kind of like which would represent a major victory, decades in the making for these anti-abortion, pro-forced birth advocates. It's really alarming and scary, and I think it was really informative to be able to talk to Peter about the sort of legal ramifications about this. We talked about the leak, the decades of court decisions that have led to this moment. I think it's going to be a really good discussion to sort of add a bunch of context to this ongoing story, which again is a really, really scary development.
Yes, it is. It's something that advocates have been warning about and people didn't take seriously, and they dismissed their concerns. And now here we are. And as we get into, there's very little that could stop this, unfortunately, because people didn't take it seriously, because Democrats didn't capitalize on their opportunity in 2009 to codify Roe, because they just let it slip, because RBG didn't retire, because they lost a nomination with Merrick Garland. There's all these different things that fed into this, and now here we are. So as a listener and you as a person, there's very
I'm
little
detecting
you can
some
do as
anti-girl boss sentiment about RBG there, by
guess.
the way, and telling her.
I mean, we talked
what
about
to do.
that last time Peter was on the show, and it's like I'm kind of stuck in the middle. It's like, yeah, it's easy to be like Monday morning quarterback after she dies and now seeing the consequences years later, but also like, yeah, you really should have. That it wasn't guaranteed that Hillary was going to win. I don't know. It's just it's tough. It's not just her fault either. It's definitely like Democrats in general in 2009.
Yeah, I think it represents kind of decades of failure on the part of the sort of liberal movement and the Democratic Party. It's one element of that.
Yeah. There are things you can do this week. There's things you can do right now. And what you can do right now is donate to abortion funds. So abortionfunds.org takes you to a link of all the abortion funds in the country. If you want to focus on red states and states in the South, that's great. Let's do it. Just please, if you have the means, donate to an abortion fund or multiple abortion funds. And then this weekend, there's protests nationwide to stand in opposition to what the Supreme Court and Republicans are about to do. Go to mobilize.us. You'll see it right there on the front page. Find one in your area and show up this Saturday.
Yes. Again, it's a moment when I think everyone, I think, is feeling extremely helpless about this seemingly like inevitable decision, which also feels like a sort of a really ominous sign of like where things are going culturally in the U.S., especially on the verge of the right kind of retaking power in these next couple of election cycles, which we get into with Peter. Let's get to our talk with Peter, aka the Law Boy of the 5 to 4 podcast. Again, it was a really good one. I think you're going to enjoy it. He will be joining the show right after this. One of the like sure signs, both that it's been this like ongoing pandemic situation for the last 2 years, and I'm just like getting old, is that now I've started to notice like the various backyard birds that show up. I have like little relationships with all of them. We got a cardinal that stops by a couple times a day. I'm always happy to see that little fella. It's nice, They're like little friends that come to visit you.
I do have to say that is some old people shit.
Yeah, really exactly.
Shit, yeah, 1000%.
Yeah, absolutely. It was noticing that, and as well, like when you're in like the hardware store, the closer you get to 40, the more appealing you find that the kitchen knickknacks, the various like
that's true.
That's stuff.
True.
Yeah,
that I can relate to. When I'm in a hardware store, everything you see, you're like, that would be nice. That would be nice to have.
It's tricky. Talk about an investment scheme. You walk through that hardware store, you got to go get all the different knickknacks, which actually is a physical thing that you can physically bring to your home and use that for like a useful purpose. That's not just like an image of an ape or a different creature, which you've just kind of arbitrarily assigned some kind of value.
You want it to be fake. You want it to be something you can't touch, something that cannot physically manifest at all. That's where the value is.
Right, yeah. When you just put all your belief into it, all your wishes into it, similar to fairies. And that's what gives it the value. That's what gives it life.
That's right. I mean, Instant Pots have been basically $59.99 for a decade. But Bored Apes, they've been shooting up. They're up millions of percentage.
Yeah, the line's supposed to go up. It's not supposed to stay stable. That's not the point. I'm glad I know you get these basic economic concepts, so it's good to have someone who understands these things.
The wave of stable coins that are just plummeting, and all of these people have been wondering, how could this happen?
Yeah, it's literally called
stable and tied to the dollar. I don't know. I'm just as mystified.
Yeah, it turns out that what tethers it to the dollar is one guy pressing a big red button in his office all day. And if he falls asleep, it's over. The entire crypto economy crashes.
Yeah.
Do we know why this is crashing?
People do. I don't know. When you say we, do you mean one of us?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been reading a little bit about this stuff today. Like part of it, I know there's people in that world that are accusing people of some kind of nefarious activity to either short this or to deliberately make this happen. I don't know how true that is or whether that's tied to reality or whether it's just coping for the fact that they've invested their life savings in this like fake thing. I don't know. I'm sure there are people, powerful people that have dipped their fingers into this kind of thing that are shorting these and are trying to make money off the inevitable collapse. I don't have any doubt of that.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything. I also haven't been following too close, but it seems like every single coin or investment or scheme has just plummeted, and some it just like going from like over $100 a coin to $1 or something, which is wild. I'm just kind of confused as to what inspired it, because I also know like the actual standard market is also not doing well. I didn't know if they were connected or if this is part of like a broader regulatory concern that they have now that the Biden administration has kind of tapped all the agencies to see how they connect to blockchain.
I think it was the collapse of the stable coin plus the just plummeting of the tech market, which maps like perfectly to Bitcoin, even though people think they're like completely separate things and Bitcoin's like a hedge to the traditional markets. They actually are basically run by the same algorithms, it seems.
Yeah, well, I think the important thing to know is that when it comes to like generally the non-crypto economy, I think we can all rest assured that none of the corruption or any of the bad practices that led to the financial crisis of 2008, of course, they've knocked off all that kind of behavior, the shady dealings and all that stuff. They've fixed all those issues. So regardless of whatever fluctuations we're seeing in the crypto market, I'm sure that everything else when it comes to the non-crypto economy will continue to get better moving forward. So
Absolutely.
I'm pretty sure that's okay. Yeah.
Absolutely. Not worried at all.
I'm sure you both saw the story today. It said adjustable rate mortgages are now at like their highest rate since 2008.
Huh. Okay.
That's the sign of a healthy economy. People can pay those high rates.
It offers borrowers flexibility. You know, they don't have to pay as much up front. You have the freedom to pay a little now and then a lot more later, and then potentially when the bubble bursts, you're underwater. But you have that choice. You don't have to live in this monotonous fixed rate mortgage tyranny.
Yeah. No, it's tedious to have to pay the same amount every single month. And look, if this gets too risky, then all they have to do is you just take a bunch of those adjustable rate mortgages, right? You bundle them together. Right. That way the risk is distributed across them.
God, that's so smart.
And then it's in one product, right? And if that becomes too risky, you combine those with other bundles, and you just keep doing that until the risk goes away.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. They should come up with a name for those. You know, all that debt you're kind of collateralizing.
Yeah.
I don't know what it would be.
Right. I don't know either. Yeah. I don't think anyone does.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're recording this, Rob, because these are really good ideas that let's float this right up to the top.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get some kind of like a default swap kind of situation. I don't know, something going on like that. No, it's really good, especially here in Canada. You know, their housing market also very stable. I think it's totally not a troubling sign that houses have like doubled and tripled in value over the last couple of years. Basically impossible for vast majority of people to find housing. We're in like full like wheelbarrow full of cash, like Weimar Republic era stuff when it comes to our housing market. And again, that's just going to keep going up. So if you're in, you can just hold on to that. And,
look, some people are winners. And my parents bought a house in the suburbs of Pennsylvania for $6 in 1989, and they just sold it for $28 million. So
yeah, there we go.
Nice.
We're just having too many avocado toasts and everything. It makes it too difficult to have that kind of sensible investment strategy.
There's really nothing stopping anybody listening to this from following that same path. Like, you just have to go and look for bargains. Yep. You shouldn't just buy the first house you see. It's pretty simple.
Yeah. You save up over a summer of like mowing lawns and stuff, and then you're good to go.
Yeah. You put on a full suit, a 3-piece suit, and you walk around town looking for deals.
Yeah. It's our generation just doesn't want to work.
No, they don't want to do that. They don't want to get out there, knock on doors, shake hands.
They want everything handed to them. They don't want to put in, the time and effort of signing away or signing a contract or a mortgage deal you didn't read with, some 30% APR. It's okay. Just take the time and do it.
Yeah. Put down the anime, pick up a lease.
Thank you. Been waiting for someone to say it. first. Do we talk about gaming in between? Is that adding a difficulty level to the transition?
We can talk about gaming now or do a gaming intermission later. It doesn't matter to me either way.
But you are a gamer, though, right, Lawboy? I believe we established this. Yeah,
I game. I do. I've been doing a lot of really casual shit lately, though, like just playing Civilization a lot and shit like that. Played a lot of Hades this year until my Nintendo Switch Joy-Con broke, and since then I have played zero Hades because it sucks now because my dude's always running upward, and that's why I transitioned back to Civilization and just casual shit. So I have not embraced the new generation yet. I don't have a PS5 supply chain. You guys are familiar with the supply chain issues. It's been. I
have a PS5, so that sounds like a you problem.
Well, look. Some people game so hard that they can overcome the supply chain, but I'm not one of those people. I tried very hard for a month when they first came out to get one, and then I gave up forever because I was so sad and frustrated. Mm-hmm. I will eventually try again, and hopefully by then Joe Biden will have fixed this whole problem.
It's kind of like he doesn't want gamers to thrive. That's the takeaway here.
Yeah,
like he's doing this intentionally.
What is this, China? It's ridiculous.
He's trying to blame China, but it has his fingerprints all over it. There should be a PS5 in every home.
Look, I mean, all of the companies that make the chips, right? They're U.S. based for the most part, and they could pass like the big semiconductor assistance bill that they were talking about, like the gamers help bill. I forget. I don't know what it's called.
That's what it's called.
But there's a bill that could save gaming, and Joe Biden's just sitting on it, doing jack shit, blaming Joe Manchin. It's bullshit, dude.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, just pick up the pen, sign it. I'd say it's more important than student debt cancellation.
Yeah,
I think we get all agree. I speak for all three of us here.
10 grand of student cancellation that's means tested. You might as well just give me a PS5.
That's like, what are they going to spend those savings on in the first place? Just get the middleman.
Yep. Just give me a PS5. Give me a V-Bucks gift card. I'm good.
Yeah. There we go.
Rob, what have you been playing lately?
I know you've been trying to get me into Rust.
I'm getting there.
I'm still on the Fortnite grind. I also started picking up No Man's Sky. Getting back into No Man's Sky. Having fun exploring the galaxy.
Is it true that that's good now? Because I've heard that.
Well, the thing is, like, with No Man's Sky, it famously, like, really overpromised the game that they were giving to people originally. And people, when they got this game, it was kind of cool, but a lot of the features that had been kind of, like, implicitly promised as part of this game weren't really there. And now, after a couple of years, they've been consistently just adding all that stuff to the game. So now, at this point, when you get it, it's pretty much the game that they were kind of suggesting it was going to be off the bat before they launched. So it's been kind of like a come from behind story, but it's very fun to just kind of pick up and kind of relaxing to go and fly around, find minerals and explore and cool stuff. And now you can have other people roaming around in your universe, and there's pirates and all kinds of crazy stuff that you can do now. So that's been fun.
So you're colonizing space.
Pretty much, yeah. I try not to do the colonizer stuff. I try to be friendly with all the creatures that I encounter, but you just go and you're immediately just blasting big craters in the surface of the planet and extracting all the minerals and stuff. There's no way of getting around that.
The well-meaning colonizer. I've heard that story before.
Mm-hmm, I'm going full like British Empire. We're bringing civilization. We're building railroads and hospitals and all these places, and they should be very thankful. All these creatures. Canada, the game. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you said, I've been playing Rust lately. I can't remember if I told you how I got this going, but I wanted a private server because the player base for Rust is notoriously toxic, like a lot of games. And there's also a ton of racist people that play on the public servers, and I didn't want to do that, so I figured out how to do a private server. And I knew nothing about this, so I learned basic Linux and AWS to create a virtual private cloud and have it hosted like a cloud server that people who aren't awful can join. So we've opened that up to like the TYT community. We've got like 30 or 50 or so people who are on that server now. And it's nice because everyone just kind of cooperates. And instead of just PvP and stealing everyone's stuff, everyone just cooperates, shares surplus resources, helps each other. It's fun. And it's like, I like playing that game when I don't have to worry about some psycho racist kid breathing down my neck.
Yeah. You're doing like Rust communism now.
Basically, yeah.
Very cool.
So, Lawboy, you had a transition, and you wanted to kind of oversee the transition from this talk to Roe, right? You specifically wanted to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I just want to say it up front. I'm glad that we've got three guys talking about abortion rights
that's what everyone,
all in one place.
Yeah.
Not crowded out by women or anyone else directly impacted by abortion. I think this is it feels fresh to me.
Yeah. The world really needed three guys to sit down and really hash this stuff out, and so I'm glad that we're
absolutely.
I was telling Rob earlier, so I had thought about that, but I also looked at our listener metrics and the demographics of our listener base, and 80% or so are male, which isn't surprising because it's hosted by two guys, and there are obviously women and non-binary people listen to the shows, and that's great, and we love them, but we also want to also use this as an opportunity to really stress that this is a moment where guys actually should be stepping up and not taking, at like protests and stuff, not taking the mic and like, oh, this is my story. But there are people who are directly impacted by this that need your support, whether it's donating to abortion funds, whether it's showing up to protests, whether it's just being there for people who are directly impacted by this and are dealing with a hard time right now. We want to stress throughout this episode that this is a moment where people who aren't directly impacted by it step up. And this is a fight you absolutely have to be a supportive figure in.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, and I think it is going to be good to get your perspective, Lawboy, about the actual, because this is when you talk about the assault on abortion rights right now, it's happening in the Supreme Court, which is something that you cover extensively. And so getting your feedback about this process and what has been happening with that, I think is going to be really integral.
So, Lawboy, take it.
Yeah.
What do you guys want to know?
Well, okay, so I mean, obviously, the really horrifying news from this week is that the leaked ruling on the part of the Supreme Court, who apparently will be striking down Roe v. Wade, obviously a long-standing fear on the part of reproductive justice advocates for a really long time. I guess I think that's a good place to start, is about this leak, because of course that's the main thing that the right-wing media really immediately fixated on, not this drastic assault on reproductive rights that's going to affect millions of women as well as trans and non-binary people. That's been kind of generations in the making, that will cost lives. This will kill people. It's really, really dangerous and scary. But of course, right-wing political and media figures immediately fixated on this leak. So I guess I would just ask you, from someone who has covered the Supreme Court for a long time, how unprecedented is this? And do you have any theories about where this has come from? I know there's a number of people that have weighed in on this. What do you make of this leak, and what do you make of this ruling in general? We'll get to that as well.
Well, the leak is unprecedented in the sense that a draft opinion, to my knowledge, has never leaked. But leaks from the court are actually relatively common. It's not uncommon that the outcomes of cases, the basic outcomes, are leaked. It happens with some frequency. Even since this leak, there have been more leaks about the state of the case. So we know, for example, that there are still 5 votes to overturn Roe, that has not changed despite the fact that the draft that leaked was dated February something. So, leaks are not uncommon. It's not something that's unheard of. As for where it came from, we don't know. My best guess remains that it's a disgruntled liberal. Now, that was the initial thinking, and that
kind
is
of
why,
like simplest possible explanation.
Yes,
kind of thing,
exactly. Right? Now, I'm not super committed to that explanation. There are some compelling theories as to why it might be a conservative. A lot of people pointed out that if the 5-vote majority is sort of tenuous, leaking it might put some pressure on any wavering justice to stick to the plan. It would make backing out look kind of like cowardly, right? I don't think that's the least convincing thing, but it does feel like a little bit too cute to me. I don't understand why a conservative would leak it with that in mind. Why rock the boat if you feel like you have 5 votes, even if it's a shaky 5 votes? But who knows? It's perfectly reasonable to think that might have happened. It's also sort of obvious if you look at the course of quote unquote leaks to media about the court, it's pretty clear that conservatives speak to the press more than liberals. They enjoy some gamesmanship and perhaps are just a little bit less institutionalist than the libs. And so I think there's a decent shot it came from the right. I wouldn't be shocked either way, frankly. My basic position on this is that it just doesn't matter that much. Where the real issue at hand is that they are poised to overturn Roe v. Wade, and that the focus on the leak is obviously a distraction to some degree.
Yeah, you've seen a lot of outrage from the right trying to act like this is some grave, serious issue, when in reality, all it is we know that it's going to happen, a month, 2 months before it does, potentially. Right. I mean, there's some people who think that Roberts is going to be able to sway a conservative justice or two, but I don't see that happening. This is everything they want, especially Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and what the fuck's her name?
Amy Coney Barrett.
Yeah, the handmaids. I mean, this is like literally her dream, and like I don't think Thomas, and certainly not Alito. They don't seem like, definitely not Alito, but Thomas doesn't even seem like somebody who would switch.
No, certainly not. I think the only hope would be someone like Kavanaugh, who has shown some moments of pragmatism in the past. But I think that Roe is too central to the conservative legal movement's mission to really be for him to back off. But
they didn't put him in place. They didn't put Kavanaugh in place. They don't have this whole like Federalist Society system in place to get Supreme Court justices that are gonna balk at the final moment of their final victory. That's not what this has been about.
Right. No. I totally agree with that. I think that if you look at like the course of the conservative legal movement, it started in the 70s and picked up steam in the 80s. In large part because in the 60s, and then leading into the early 70s, there were these huge civil rights wins at the Supreme Court. And so the right sort of like fosters this movement to counter it. And Roe v. Wade was sort of last straw, right? It drops in 1973. And as a result, like a huge amount of focus within the movement is targeting Roe in particular. They believe that it's sort of symbolic of the rot within the institution and the law and the liberal bias, et cetera, et cetera. So it doesn't feel like a moment where they're likely to blink, but I suppose you never know.
Would you mind clarifying? Like, I don't know if this is just for me because I'm Canadian, and like I understand that Roe v. Wade is the central law that has made abortion accessible in the United States. But would you mind just like explaining to me and to anyone else that might be listening and is not sure of the exact details of this, exactly what it is about Roe and how it interacts with laws around this and how it did make abortion accessible?
Yeah. So Roe is predicated in the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. Essentially, there's a due process clause in the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment was one of the Reconstruction era amendments coming out of the post-Civil War era. And the way that it's been interpreted is that it protects fundamental liberties that Americans have. And so the basic question is abortion one of those fundamental liberties? The court in Roe said, yes, it is, because it's sort of subsumed within this general right to privacy that the court has found in other cases. Conservatives always hated that. They thought the right to privacy was overwrought, that it was essentially, judicial activism, that it's not rooted in the text of the Constitution or anything else, and that it's just sort of judges' policy preferences. So the way that it has played out is that it nullified any rule, any law in the states that outlawed abortion, right? That's the gist of it. It's not quite that simple. You can regulate late-term abortions, et cetera, much more readily. But that's the fundamental holding in Roe, that there is a right to abortion because people have a right to privacy, and that is within the 14th Amendment. And conservatives have hated that because they just view it as sort of like both politically and literally liberal interpretation of the 14th Amendment.
How does this intersect with Planned Parenthood versus Casey? I mean, if this is overturned, that just completely undoes that case as well, right?
Yeah, so Casey essentially limited Roe. Roe was predicated on like this trimester framework, And Casey then sort of shifts to a viability framework. Pretty minor distinctions in some way, but it essentially made it such that after Casey, states can pretty aggressively regulate abortion after the sort of like 23rd, 24th week of a pregnancy. Previously, it had been a few weeks longer. And so that was like the real difference. Casey also creates a different framework for interpreting laws and regulations after viability, the undue burden framework. We don't have to get into it too much, but it sort of limited Roe. It was in a lot of ways a huge win because it upheld Roe. It didn't overturn it, but in other ways a loss because it was really materially limiting and continues to be, although people talk about Roe v. Wade, Casey is really the case that defines the right as we understand it.
So now with this potentially being overturned, a lot of people are saying this is just, Schumer today said it's open season on American freedoms. Could you talk about the risks this poses if this case is totally overturned? We just throw out Roe. What that might mean for other things in Americans' private lives, like contraception, birth control, even potentially marriage equality. Could you talk about like where we might go from here?
Yeah, so the most obviously targeted rights are going to be those that are also within this 14th Amendment due process framework. That includes the right to contraception that was protected in a case called Griswold v. Connecticut in the 60s. It includes the ruling in Lawrence v. Texas, which upheld which struck down anti-sodomy laws. And it also includes marriage equality. Now, marriage equality also had an equal protection component, which is, a different clause of the 14th Amendment. So there's this sort of like legal argument that it's a little bit different. But, that was a controversial decision, too. That went 5-4 with a much less conservative court. So, yeah, this stuff is all likely to be targeted. The only real question is there a conservative appetite on the court to go really hard really quickly, right? Do they want to go at all this stuff right away, or do they want to sort of take their time? Do they want to be cautious? You certainly have a few votes at least to be pretty aggressive with some of the stuff, I'm sure. Whether you can bring Kavanaugh, Barrett in, even Gorsuch on some issues might be a little bit tough. Hard to say. I don't love to make predictions with this shit because you never know. There's a ton of variables. But I would say that it's insane to think that like gay marriage is safe. That's absolute fucking nonsense.
Yeah, I mean that's something we've talked about a lot recently. So as like you see the assault on trans rights that's happening right now as well, which is also happening in the courts. But it's been a reminder of the ways that these like reactionary social conservative types in the U.S. certainly haven't forgotten about the sort of what they perceive as this loss by the sort of normalization of gay rights and the legalization of gay marriage and these things like that. But I know that there's certainly a part of that community that has not given up on these things and is determined still to claw back these rights that have been granted for gay marriage, and using the sort of trans rights issue as sort of a wedge issue that they feel a little bit more comfortable now dipping their toes into. But not a doubt at all that they're going to continue to come after rights for other marginalized groups, and this is just more of a early sort of warning sign about these culture wars that have been on the back burner for a while that they do intend to revisit.
Yeah, I mean it's the idea that like the gay marriage fight is in the rearview mirror is something that I think a lot of people just sort of take on instinct because it feels like the cultural battle has been won, and it's just not true in the courts, right? You look at the composition and you're trying to find 5 votes to uphold gay marriage, and I don't really know where they are. Someone would have to essentially completely change their position as we understand it right now. It's fucking bleak. I like can't believe that there are so many people on the right and in the center who are just like, well, come on, like they're not going to do that. It's like, dude, they just voted against it in 2015. What the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, in a way, there's this sense. I think this has been something that liberals have told themselves about. But they've said that this about abortion, but they say this about a lot of these kind of culture war issues, broader culture war issues, which is that they don't really mean to do these things. Like, I think for liberals for a long time, they've been able to fundraise over the idea of protecting abortion rights while not actually doing anything to enshrine the protection into law. Like famously under Obama, under Clinton, where there was opportunities to do this and not leave it as this precarious right that's being upheld by these court decisions. They've abdicated every responsibility to actually enshrine that into law, because I think it works well for them that they can continue to fearmonger about it and fundraise over it. And I think there's kind of an element of these powerful liberals that never really believed that these things were under threat, that they felt the right were kind of using it in the same way as just this kind of culture war wedge issue that they fundraised off and won elections over, but didn't actually have any intent to actually go after. And now I think there's the frightening thing for people are realizing this, like, oh no, these people are quite serious. They're like, they're extremely serious about rolling back these rights. Maybe there are some kind of grifters in the conservative movement that have just used this as a wedge issue to get elected or to raise money off of. But there's also quite a lot of true believers who really do have every intention of rolling back these and other rights in terms of these culture war issues. And I think this is a sign right now that this isn't just this situation of the dog that caught the car or whatever, and that they don't know what to do with it. Like, they've been preparing for decades for this moment, including waging armed struggle. Again, like, this has been a consistent decades-long effort, both inside and outside the legal system to get to this moment. And it's not just some kind of, culture war dog whistle. These people are very serious about this, and that's becoming clearer and clearer the closer they get to actually getting this result.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as for what was in the Democrats' heads over the past 15, 20 years about this stuff, I don't really know. I always sort of assume that a lot of them have a sort of politics of inevitability mindset where, moral arc of the universe bends towards justice and things will just sort of naturally get better. And so once they win, they've won, right? And it's not going to regress because that's not how history works in their minds. Meanwhile, the March for Life is just the biggest event in Washington every fucking year. And the Democrats are looking at that thinking not realizing that it's not just fucking symbolism, that those people want Roe overturned.
Right. And they've been telegraphing it. And you mentioned there are probably some grifters on the right who just, want to use it because it mobilizes people maybe for electoral gains, but that's also kind of where it started. It was a brainstorming call after those, like you mentioned, those civil rights defeats that the right encountered. They're saying, how do we get people back on our side? Well, we don't want to be known as segregationists. And it was a few religious figures and right-wing consultants on a conference call, and someone suggested abortion. And one of the people, this is a really bizarre history, but one of the people who really helped popularize it, this anti-choice crusade, there was a conspiracy theorist and his son. And the son has later come out and said he regrets it, but it was literally just conspiracy culture pushing this agenda for years until it really helped the right, turn it into one of their core issues. And Reagan was really big on that, but it just, the conspiracy roots of this are just so bizarre. And I only learned about this recently. Yeah.
I mean, look, abortion was not an issue in the Republican Party. It was not a big issue for them until the late 70s, right? Until post-Roe, they realized they could sort of grab on to a certain energy, mobilize evangelicals. And since then, evangelicals have been a big part of their base. That in our minds, I think evangelicals and Republican politics are synonymous, but it hasn't always been like that. That's something that happened because of abortion.
Yeah. And, I guess something I wanted to add to what you were pointed out at the beginning of the show, Jordan, right? Talking about, we were joking around about being a bunch of guys talking about this, but I do really think it is important that regardless of how close this issue affects you, to be extremely adamant and clear about this stuff. Like we've talked about before, I think there's if you count yourself as being kind of on the left as well, I think there's been kind of there's a tendency maybe among men especially sometimes to view this as being kind of like a niche issue or an issue that doesn't really intersect with class issues, which is obviously not the case. We see when these abortion rights are under attack, it's primarily, the poor, women of color that are affected first and foremost by a lot of these things. And this is true, by the way, in Canada as well. A lot of Canadians take these moments when they're happening in the United States to kind of gloat or about how enlightened we are. And while, abortion rights are fairly secure in Canada, it is still decriminalized. It's not fully enshrined into law. Abortion is also much more difficult to access in non-urban centers, and primarily the poor, rural people and Indigenous women are the first people that are on the front lines in Canada of not being able to access abortion. So not something that people should gloat about here. Like I was saying, it's a very serious class issue, regardless of where you're coming from. As well, just as a sign of when you talk about the rise of fascism that we're kind of seeing right now, this kind of strict devotion to like this hierarchical family union is kind of a sign of that, and a sign of this kind of like crisis moment. So the idea that I think people on the left have kind of been uncomfortable talking about this, I think we've kind of allowed people to be squishy on this issue, which I think has been not very helpful. A lot of what we're seeing right now as well in terms of the reaction to this are these protests. A couple of things I wanted to point out about this. First of all, like there was protests in LA. It was very alarming to see like a DHS show up to these like pro-abortion protests, reproductive rights protests in LA, and wondering like how they're involved in keeping the peace in these kinds of situations. We're also seeing, of course, these protests that are taking place outside of Brett Kavanaugh's house, which of course has kicked off a lot of controversy as well. If we thought the leak of the Supreme Court ruling was causing a lot of consternation, the idea that protesters have actually gathered outside of Brett Kavanaugh's house and have been protesting out there has set off a whole other wave of sort of hand-wringing. What do you make of that? Do you think is that a sign of the intolerant left intimidating the justices and interfering in the legal process, or what do you make of the protests outside of Brett Kavanaugh's house?
It's nice that those beautiful colonials that all the justices seem to live in are getting some press. You know. There's a relatively long tradition of protesting outside the houses of public officials, and I think you have a couple things working together in the sort of reaction to it. One is like pure bad faith right-wing shit where they're just looking to distract. Another is like this kind of gullible liberal idea that the court is separate from politics. So like, why would you be protesting outside of Sam Alito's house? He is simply doing law, and that's not politics, and you can't influence a judge to rule the way that you want them to, because that's what you do to politicians, right? And I think that all of that sort of misses the basic point, which is these are extremely powerful people who have a lot of influence over the lives of people in this country and people outside of this country for that matter. And yeah, you should be allowed to go relatively close to them and say, hey, this sucks, dude. And I don't think it's much more complicated than that. The reaction from like the media, just the fucking most cowardly, like pathetic shit I've ever seen. There's been like no violence that I've seen in these settings, nothing that even like looked like a threat. And everyone is sort of clutching their pearls about it as if someone was like hurling Molotovs in fucking Kavanaugh's living room window or something. It's not what happened. There's just a bunch of peaceful protests, like on the public streets outside of Supreme Court justices' homes. Who gives a shit?
Yeah, the Fox coverage was funny, if not sad. They presented this footage of, candlelight vigils and, very peaceful protests with commentary like, we didn't even know if we wanted to show you this footage. It's so horrifying. When it's like just people standing there. The one at Alito's house, like the crowd was even vetted. That's like nothing's happening here that's dangerous or inappropriate or bad. It's totally scaremongering and bad faith. But also you're seeing the same people who supported January 6th now come out and say, oh, this absolutely should not be. This is disgusting. Like Josh Hawley, who, gave that iconic fist bump to the January 6th crowd, or fist pump to the crowd before they rioted, later went on to sell merch of him giving that fist pump. He's now leading the charge saying, oh, this shouldn't happen. This is disgusting. You should not protest justices at their home. Like, pick a side. What do you want? But ultimately, just because of what people are protesting. If this was the other way around, they would love it.
Look, in Hawley's mind, look, this is about the substantive issues. Yes, you can protest the fraudulent election because Trump won. You cannot protest Roe v. Wade, no matter how peacefully, because abortion bad. Right? That's just, sorry, Jordan, but there is a difference between good things and bad things.
It's funny because I was told this was like the populist Republican that was going to really like speak to economic needs of people. And I mean, it's almost trite to point this out, the hypocrisy in the conservative movement about this, but it's worth saying again, like these so-called pro-life conservatives, of course, have like staked so much of their political capital on protecting the lives of the unborn, and how the unborn has become this way on the right to kind of like virtue signal and talk about how they're standing up for this horrible injustice. And while, of course, at the same time opposing every single other economic benefit that could possibly help people once they are born, of course, where they are against daycare, they're against public school, food stamps, welfare. Of course, they don't want women to have pre or postnatal care. They don't want any family planning. They don't want any contraceptives.
Well, if you put a kid in daycare, though, then he learns to become reliant on the state.
That's it. Yeah.
Our hardiest children are not in daycare. They are just sort of milling about on lawns somewhere, and they take care of themselves, or they learn to, or they die, and the stronger children survive. That's the vision of the world that a Hawley has, I think.
The other really dangerous an offensive and inappropriate protest occurred at Susan Collins' house. Susan Collins has positioned herself.
That's terrifying.
Horrifying.
Bit of a content warning here
to the listeners.
This is really dangerous
proceed
stuff.
with caution. So she is somebody who has positioned herself as a pro-choice Republican, and in the Kavanaugh, especially,
turns out she's just a pussy,
in the Kavanaugh debate during his confirmation hearings, she really stressed that she needed to make sure that he felt that Roe was settled law, and that he assured her that it was. And now she's like mortified that he could go against what he told her. Same thing with Murkowski. So Collins also won't support codifying Roe, which we saw today.
Not so horrified that she'll do anything to protect this
exactly.
Right. Yeah.
So not doing anything, but protesters chalked, please support codifying Roe, or please protect Roe, something to that extent, chalk on her sidewalk, and she called the police. And the police determined it was very colorful and intricate, chalk design, but it wasn't threatening, despite her claims. And this is just another instance of people trying to control the opposition and trying to, silence people's thoughts, their beliefs, their activism, whatever. That it's totally bad faith. And when she's presented with that opportunity, her and Murkowski, they both balked.
Yeah, I mean, look, they don't fucking believe in anything, right? They just sort of want to maintain the optical illusion that they support women's rights in some way. And I don't mean to be gender essentialist. I really do think that they don't care about trans and non-binary people, even aesthetically. There's so much going on with like the Collins shit, and I'm not like a political analyst, I'm a law and court guy, but it's hard not to look at them as just completely bad faith actors, to the point where like paying them any real attention, like pinning any hope on them, is just a waste of your emotional energy. I mean, forget codifying Roe. They are, I think, pretending to be indignant about being like quote unquote lied to by Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, who, by the way, look, I don't think that those folks perjured themselves. I think that they very cagily said, yeah, Roe's like, settled law, without going on to say anything about what that would mean for how they would rule on it. When I heard that shit, it felt like doublespeak to me. Anyone who understands what the confirmation hearing process is like should be interpreting it as doublespeak. So
Lawyers are famously good at this kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's the whole fucking point of the process, right? I think that this whole, like, they were lying is a way to deflect responsibility from the people who voted them in, rather than sort of accepting that, oops, like, yeah, we put people on the court who we knew had a very good chance of overturning Roe. They sort of act as if they are flabbergasted. Oh my God, they told us that they wouldn't. And it's like, no, they really didn't. They just sort of danced around your question for long enough where you felt like you were satisfied.
The other thing that we're talking about here, because we're talking about ostensibly pro-choice Republicans, but also, of course, Joe Manchin himself also weighed on this today, and is saying like, ooh, no, actually, even though they're talking about codifying Roe into law before any of this can take effect, and Manchin is saying, oh no, that what they're talking about goes way too broad, and I just can't ever support anything like that, and that leads people to this ultimately the conversation about liberals and the Democratic Party and what they're able to actually do about this, because now you have the Democratic Party who were once again kind of saying like, well, you just got to vote, right? You just got to vote even harder, and it seems like the more people are kind of waking up to the reality that like you were in charge, you have the presidency and the House and the Senate, and this is happening while this is going on. So what purpose do we have to vote for the Democratic Party? Like I pointed out before, there's been plenty of opportunities for them to codify this into law. Obama famously promised to do this, like the first thing that he did as soon as he got elected, and did not do this. So now you have them kind of making this argument to people about how this is just another example of why you need to vote blue, you need to vote for the Democratic Party. And I think less and less people are being compelled by that when this is going on while they're in power.
Yeah, I mean, look, the MO of the Dems has for many years just been sort of to chastise voters for not voting for them rather than like offer something in exchange. And I think the reality of it is like, I don't want to be unpragmatic, like if you put me in the White House, I don't exactly know how you get Joe Manchin to turn the corner on some of these issues. But the point is that like, if what the Democratic Party wants to say, and what I think they want to say is, hey, we have sort of been outmaneuvered for many years on many different fronts, and now find ourselves without any real power, despite the fact that we have the White House, the House, and the Senate. And we don't know what to do about it. So like, if you could maybe put more of us in power, that might work, but I don't know. I just don't think that they have answers here. They have gotten absolutely wrecked on the courts for decades. And the fundamental problem wasn't like some one error here or there. It was that they like didn't understand the conservative legal movement. They didn't understand that there was like a concerted political effort to subsume the judiciary by conservatives, by Republicans. And by the time they realized it, it was way too late. And conservatives had the courts, and now a Democratic president can't do shit. And I don't know what they can sort of say at this point to explain themselves. It's just sort of like, well, we got absolutely fucking schooled for decades on end. Apologies to all of our voters. That I think is the real message from the Democratic Party. That's what I hear when they say vote. I see a party without any answers on this shit.
Well, and you have like Nancy Pelosi literally campaigning for anti-choice Democrats, like currently at this moment, like that Henry Cuellar, who's under FBI investigation, who has like steadfastly voted against the Democrats' own agenda and is like not in favor of abortion rights. And now you have Nancy Pelosi on one hand saying, oh yeah, vote for Democrats so we can protect these rights, while simultaneously campaigning for an anti-choice Democrat over a pro-choice woman of color.
That's what too much ice cream does to a motherfucker,
Apparently, yeah. A lot of the ways we talk about this issue, again, is I think you realize the way that like it's been just decades now of this pro-forced birth movement just influencing the rhetoric and influencing politics in such a way that we're all affected by it, and you even using words like pro-choice and pro-life is giving into their kind of framing when it comes to this issue. Even the way I think, a lot of when I've seen this kind of like liberal defense of abortion rights that kind of starts with saying like, well, no one wants to have an abortion, or
right,
no
they
one
should be
wants
safe
more
and
abortions,
rare or some shit like that.
Yeah, exactly. Using that kind of framing in order to appeal to people that are kind of squishy on this issue, while simultaneously contributing to the stigmatization of it and suggesting that it is something like wrong or immoral. When again, if we're talking about people that are on the left, it should just be unequivocally supporting, abortion rights as well as, reproductive rights, contraception, and all the maternal health care, which should also be part of a comprehensive health care package, full stop, without any equivocation or any kind of like hand-wringing about it. This has been, again, this is a way that like liberals have been influenced, I think, over the last several decades by the discourse on this, by people who have had these exact designs in mind the entire time.
Yeah, I mean, the concessions to right-wing framing go even farther in like the legal context, where it's a very common refrain among liberal legal academics and lawyers that the basis for Roe is particularly weak. Now, I don't think that's the case. I think that belief is the result of like absorbing conservative legal propaganda about what the law should be, about originalism and all those concepts that should be sort of outright rejected by the left. And so as a result, you've had people, RBG even, when she was a younger lawyer, basically said that Roe would have been stronger if it was an equal protection case rather than a due process case. And that sort of idea has been extremely popular in liberal circles for many years, and contributed to conservative lawyers sort of feeling like they could win this, right? Like even the liberals don't buy it. Even they know that Roe is weak legally. That concession is, I don't want to say it's what caused this, but it certainly prevented the legal left from mobilizing a real robust defense of Roe.
Yeah, but what could be done now? I mean, that's the thing. There's a huge mobilization this weekend, and I would encourage people to show up because it's the right thing to do. If you go to mobilize.us, you could see where one is in your area. And like I said earlier, donating to abortion funds is key. But I mean, outside of that, what could they even do? This vote rhetoric doesn't do anything for anybody who's going to be a victim of trigger laws when this decision comes down. So it's tough not to feel hopeless in this moment, but also you want to keep people fired up because this is an injustice. But what can be done?
Yeah, I mean, that's why, like, donating to abortion funds is so important, right? And it's such a shame that, like, Democrats don't have the links with their base that Republicans do. The GOP, like, you go to fucking rnc.org/donate and you're like funding militias like directly, The DNC doesn't touch their base, and it forces us to sort of operate around them. And I mean, abortion funds are, like, frankly, I think the best thing to be donating to right now, and really the only thing you can do to sort of help blunt the blow that is coming, because it does seem like it's coming. I don't think that there are like good short-term solutions other than that. That's, and I'm not an organizer, so I don't want to speak to the organizing side of it, but I've just been fucking pumping as much money as I feel comfortable pumping into abortion funds, because they're on the ground doing the work that needs to be done and will need to be done even more aggressively in the next couple months.
What people need to understand, and I'm sure many are familiar, is that people are still going to need reproductive care, and they're just, because of these trigger laws, they're going to need to travel out of state. And that is extremely costly. And it's, it could range up to, 1,000 or 2,000 with everything when you factor in flights. If you're flying, if you live in the South, I mean, the closest state is going to be probably DC. It's not a state, but yeah, I mean, it's DC, it's New York, California. I mean, those are going to be those are the states where people are going to need to go. and donating to abortion funds, an actual abortion fund, not just a national organization that does advocacy around the issue, but an actual abortion fund will help mitigate that financial burden for people who desperately need it. Because otherwise you're going to have situations like Lizelle Herrera in Texas, who tried to self-induce, and the hospital called the police on her, which she was later let go, but she should have never been in that situation to begin with. So supporting abortion funds is going to be essential.
Yeah, and okay, so I'm going to be careful with what I say here. I'm not kind of trying to be edgy when we talk about this stuff. I do think it's just important to point out, though, especially with all the hand-wringing about this, the protest outside of Kavanaugh's house, and the idea that, like, oh, there's the possibility of violence on the horizon. And it needs to be clear to everyone, though, that these laws, this attack on abortion rights, on reproductive rights, this is inherently violent. Right? There's violence going in one direction when it comes to this. And as I mentioned before, there's been a campaign of direct violence on the part of these pro-forced birth activists now for decades, firebombing abortion clinics and murdering doctors. I mean, like, famously, George Tiller is the most famous case of this, who is talked about often on Fox News on the part of Bill O'Reilly, who regularly called this guy like a baby killer on Fox News right up until the day that he got shot. There's been this campaign of systematic violence being waged on the part of pro-forced birth activists for a long time now. And a lot of the hypocrisy about the hand-wringing about that, and about how, okay, we can peacefully protest and we can vote, but that's really the only solution to any of this stuff. It does kind of like hand wave away the very real human toll that these kinds of attacks are going to have on actual people who will die of complications if they're not able to access abortions, if they access unsafe abortions. This is going to have a very real human cost, and it is inherently violent to institute these laws in the first place. So I think that's something that should always be kept in mind when we see the media or people in the political class start hand-wringing about peaceful protest outside of judges' houses, when there's actually people that are going to die as a result of this kind of assault on reproductive rights.
Right. I mean, not to mention that basically every worst case scenario has started to manifest. Like, I remember watching Megan McArdle's tweets. I imagine you guys are loosely familiar with Megan McArdle.
Yes, big fan over here.
Big centrist brain.
Friend of the pod.
She initially tweeted, I just can't get with people who think that, they're going to go after contraception next. And then someone was like, well, they're literally doing it right now. Here's a link to the laws being passed across the country. And she followed it up being like, well, yeah, but that doesn't apply to all contraception. It applies to birth control pills and Plan B and IUDs. And you could see the Overton window shifting in her fucking brain over the course of 3 tweets. And you see that shit happening a lot. I'm just using her as an example, but the brutality of the state laws being proposed and passed right now really can't be overstated. They are deliberately designed to punish anyone who is seeking reproductive health care.
Yeah, it's a really, really dangerous situation. It does seem like it's just sort of a first domino to fall in a larger battle against a lot of culture war issues that maybe we thought were relatively safe. And it doesn't say anything good about the coming political shifts that are happening in the U.S., especially when you think about these next couple of election cycles, which, regardless of any of this stuff, do not look good for liberals and don't look good for the Democratic Party. So, Lawboy, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast to break down these sort of legal aspects of this. Highly informative, as usual.
Yeah,
Great
man.
to talk to you. Thanks for joining the
Next
for joining
time,
the pod.
you guys should just call me Peter.
Okay,
I'm trying.
It's just kind of fun.
I'm trying to sort of pivot to a real
less gimmicky.
Yeah, I'm a real guy now. Okay. I'm a real analyst. I do real
boy.
stuff. I'm doing the full Pinocchio into a real boy. But yeah, that's my aspiration. That next time you guys are just like, hey, Peter. What's up?
We'll consider it.
We'll take that into consideration.
No promises.
That's all I ask. I appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. We'll talk to you soon.
See ya.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to The Insurgents. If you want to subscribe to the show, you can find us on iTunes or Spotify or at Substack, theinsurgents.substack.com. You'll get the latest episodes delivered straight to your inbox as well as our newsletter. On Twitter, we are at InsurgentsPod. Tweet at us, harass Ken in our replies, and then send us your hate mail to theinsurgentspod@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening.